Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen, the dear public, dear participants, I think I've been moderating these open forum sessions here in Davos since 5 or 6 years, and I can tell you that I've always had the good luck of moderating when the room was packed. So let me say thank you right away, and I will also do that at the end of the session. Thank you very much for being here and for your attention. Actually, I wanted to begin this discussion by saying the following. The three monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, have the claim that their God is the only God, true God, and therefore that their doctrine or their religion is the only one. Just before the discussion started, Mrs. Brocke has just corrected my point of view by saying that this is not true in Judaism. This claim to absolute truth is not one that Judaism has. So the question is, to what extent this claim to truth of religions fosters violence? To what extent is religion abused when violence is applied with religious motivations underlying it? Or is there in religion itself a certain kernel of violence? And a very important question is, how can various religious communities cohabit when these religions have different claims to truth? This is more or less the framework in which we will have a discussion. We have a very interesting panel here. We have Edna Brocke, a political scientist. She taught Judaism at the Protestant faculty at the University of Bochum until recently. She is head of the Old Synagogue Memorial in Essen in Germany, and for her work in interreligious and interfaith communication, she has been awarded prizes and distinctions. Marsha Pali, professor of multicultural studies at the New York University. She's also done a lot of research in Berlin. She writes editorials for all sorts of newspapers, and she's an author. She's written about the influence of evangelism on politics in the United States, amongst others. Then on the right, we have Mohammad Yafa. He is an Imam. In the 90s, he was one of the leaders of a Muslim militia in the civil war in the north of Nigeria. Today, with his former enemy, a pastor, he now is co-coordinator of an interfaith mediation center in Nigeria. Muhammad Abdul Bari, also a Muslim, educator. Since 2006, he's been the chairman of the British Council of Muslims, that is the supreme body for Muslims in the UK. Then Thomas Wipp, theologian and pastor, president of the Council of Federation of Swiss Protestant Churches, also president of this same council or association in Europe. Welcome to you, Mr. Wipp. Now, Mrs. Brocke, could you then explain to us why Judaism doesn't have this claim to truth? Don't you believe that your God is the only true God? No, most Jews wouldn't declare it in this way. Maybe some marginal groups do. But in principle, Judaism is not a religion as it would be stated normally. So the picture in the brochure is very appropriate. I wondered why I was invited, since only Christianity and Islam are displayed here. Judaism is a community of being rather than of religion. So in principle, Judaism does not aim at claiming or laying a claim to truth and to their religion, the religion being the only good one. Anyone is welcome. Obviously, conversion is not very easy, but it's possible. It's probably a bone of contention, has been in the course of history. Paulus is maybe the turning point, but it is certainly not this potential or this claim for mankind for having made this discovery. Now, Mrs. Brocke has said that in Judaism, as she can see it, there is not this claim. Mr. Barry, do you think that your religion is the only true one and your God the only true one? Maybe you can give a very short answer.
I don't come from theological background. I'm a community activist, but I have studied my religion quite well. Islam considers itself as a chain of third in the chain of three Abrahamic faiths: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And obviously, the it's a monotheistic religion and considers God as the supreme being that who not only controls, who maintains this universe for a purpose. And so there are universal truth in these three Abrahamic faiths, including Islam. And this truth is the basic truth that human beings have. Interpretation could be different and explanation could be different, but Islam claims that out of these three Abrahamic faiths, Islam is a main value is to serve humanity and also serve the Creator.
Okay. Thank you very much. Frau Pauli,
I've read that you're also Jewish. You're Jewish, Mrs. Pauli? Is that right? I've read that somewhere. What about your claims to truth?
I have no claims to truth. I'm here as a researcher, not representing any religious confession.
Okay, thank you. Herr Pfarrer Wipf.
Mr. Wipf? Well, if you understand truth, that we Christians have to believe that our God is the only God, I have to say, I don't know, no one knows, only God would know that. But we cannot evade truth. Whether you are religious or not, you, as an individual, have to find your path. But it is every individual's truth, and my truth cannot be someone else's truth. But I have to deal with it, I have to cope with it. We cannot evade this discussion about truth. But let me stress again, it's my truth, which is my conviction, and other people have other truths, because we live in a realm of relativity. God is truth, or truth is God. The German Protestant churches issued a paper in 2003 on this subject, stating very clearly that the ecumene of churches or ecumene of Christians is not possible because they believe that their God is the only one. Well, Christianity came forth out of Judaism, so for Christians, truth is always one's own conviction, the conviction of a Christian community. I'm convinced of the existence of the loving God who supports human beings, but I cannot turn this into an absolute truth, and certainly not through violence. Truth imposes itself through God. Mr. Ashafa, how do you see this issue? Or do you claim that your religion is the true one? I suppose as an imam of your religion, you would have to have this obligation, or is that not correct?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wa salatu wa salam ala ashrafil mursaleen. Distinguished brothers, I greet you with the greeting of peace by saying Assalamu alaikum again, meaning peace be with you all. The important about this subject of discussion is that truth is manifestation of our reality. Realities based on what we see, what we know, what we learn, what we understand from our tradition, from our culture. If our reality is the truth, then what we see, it simply means what we know. And what we see it is what we know to be what it is. So in the light of this, for us as Muslims, truth about the divine of religion is a universal concept, and most importantly within the Abrahamic traditions. However, within it, the reality, our own reality as Muslims, is upheld as our own reality, meaning our truth as the universal truth to us. However, we still agree, Islam acknowledges the truth of the other, that they have right to stand by their own truth, which is their own reality. And that's why when you talk about the truth in Islam, under inna dina inda Allahil Islam, then it says, yes, within we have the Jews who have their own truth, we have the Christians who have their own truth, and we have those who doesn't go within the traditions, who still have their own reality, which is their own truth.
Also auch hier diese
So a stress on every individual having his or her own truth. Mr. Vip, in your biography, you show this whole spectrum, the peaceful aspect as well as the violent aspect of your religion. Was there a moment in your life when there was this change from violence to peace, or the violent component to the peaceful component?
Yes, absolutely. Most often in the search for our truth, in searching for reality of what is our own reality, we have mentors, people who educate, who teach us how to identify our own reality of truth. And in doing these mentors, you call them masters, you call them teachers or instructors. And they, unfortunately, reality divide them into three. There are teachers who are well-versed, who are well-learned, who are expert by the virtue of their experience in those fields. And they are so-called expert by claim, but they are incapable scholars. Incapable because they have half-baked knowledge of the reality of what they want to teach to others. So they go through the process, but they couldn't complete the process, and they want to move into the field. And they also educate people. And the third category are experts, professional experts, who have learned, who have everything, but they are mischievous to themselves. They follow self-centered goal. So they manipulate the truth they know. They manipulate the reality to misdirect, misinform the innocent student who they have before them who want to know about this truth. And I happen to fall at the initial stage. I fall into the hand of the mischievous scholars and the incapable scholars as a young man, trying to identify the truth, saying, yes, your truth is the truth, but convince me how my truth is the truth and the others are not truth, and how to relate within my own truth, which is my reality, with the reality of those around me. So in that direction, many of them misfired. And I happened to follow that trap until when I rediscover, I met those sincere, committed experts who have purified mindset to tell me the truth and to mentor me on what the truth is and how my truth can stand side by side the truth of others within the same human family.
Thank you. Ja,
Ich möchte kurz Psalm.
In the Psalm 62:12, one spoke, but I heard two. And in traditional Judaism, Judaic interpretation, one thing Adonai spoke, but two things were heard. In the Old Testament, every verse has at least two equivalent legitimate interpretations according to Judaic interpretation. So there's not just one only true interpretation of every verse. At least there are two. And if you ask a rabbi how many, then the answer would be up to a maximum of 70. May I ask you something? You were born in 1943 in Jerusalem, so at the time of the Holocaust, you were very young during the First War. Then 1989, you went to Germany. So your life is really predestined to underline this opposition between religions and nations. Why we're in favor of cohabitation? Well, it was mainly inquisitiveness. I was in my 11th year at school in Israel, and we have biblical studies as history that are really the basis for our way of life, and I simply heard about this at school. I learned that there were people with other beliefs, so I wanted to read the Old Testament in Hebrew. I didn't read it from A to Z. I was a bit too young for that, but I caught up on that later on. And during my studies in Jerusalem, I got to know a very nice young man who then exported me to Germany. So again, it was curiosity.
Frau Perli,
Mrs. Parley, we have a rather simplified view of the United States. We have this image of American society being very much dominated by evangelical forces and is very intolerant. But you say that in the United States, the Muslims have an easier life than in Europe. Despite 9/11, they are better integrated. They are less prone to violence. How can you explain this? Or how do you explain this?
Before I answer your question, I would like to throw out the idea that I actually found the title of this program a little odd. We could also ask the question, what in religious thinking leads people to extraordinary acts of charity, generosity, anti-nuke movements, the civil rights movements, Martin Luther King, and peacemaking? We might also ask what in the religious mindset makes religion an essential part of liberal democracy, because it has a standard of ethics that is outside of what man can manipulate to suit his own interests. And therefore, religious groups function as critics of government, as watchdogs of government. So I think, of course, this is the hot media topic, but we could have equally have asked the question the other way. As I did write some articles based on data on Muslim participation in the United States in, this is to answer your second question, in economic, political, and social spheres. The data indicates after 9/11, and in spite of unfortunate incidents like the recent Fort Hood shooting, that Muslims in the United States have very high rates of participation in the economic, political, social, and education system. For example, college graduation rates are on the par with the rest of the country. And I think that has to do with the history of the United States, politically, socially, and economically as an immigrant country. It evolved a porous economic, political, and social structure, not necessarily from moral superiority, but from pragmatic need to welcome basically any immigrants stupid enough to risk a leaky boat ride across the Atlantic. So religious ethnic exclusion was not productive, and it has evolved a relatively porous economic and political system, not to simplify the hardship of being an immigrant in the United States. But when we look relative to countries that have had a very long political, economic, and social system, it's harder to break in as in places in Europe, or so the data suggest. 71% of American Muslims say the standard American dream. America's a great place to live. Most of my best friends are not Muslims. You can make it if you work hard in America, and so on.
Okay. Mr. Barr, sind Sie...
Mr. Barrow, would you agree with the analysis of what we've just heard from Mrs. Pally? Which would mean that it's more difficult, perhaps, for Muslim in Europe to integrate in society.
I think there is some basic, along with, I agree with Professor Pali, there is basic difference between Muslims in Europe and the US. US is an immigrant country, settlers country, so that's one, the composition is different than the European countries. And the fact is, most US Muslims migrated for education or for higher degrees. They were skilled in their own countries. Many Muslim countries lost their brains and they settled in the US. What happened in European countries, I can talk about Britain. Most Muslims, more than 2/3, come from South Asia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. And they come from very rural background, many of them not that educated. And when they settle in a cosmopolitan, postmodern, diverse country like Britain, they have difficulties. That's why we see the social deprivation and the underachievements in education, health, housing, and employment. Gradually, obviously, this is improving, but this is a overall social factors in the British society. But I can say that Muslims in Britain have formed their community, although most of them live in inner city, poorer areas, but even then, the community is more settled in Britain, and their contribution to economy, education, and many areas are on a par with the wider society. Obviously, there's some social cost. There are two contradictions in the Muslims in Britain. One is we constitute around 3% of British population, but sadly, the prison population in Britain is 12% of them are now sadly Muslims. At the same time, in one of the professions, medical professions, from 3% in the proportion of population to 8 to 10% medical professionals are from the Muslim community. So there is a huge contrast and contradiction in the achievements or not of the Muslim community in Britain. I think other European countries, I don't know that much, but probably follow similar pattern because they come from rural, mono-ethnic, monocultural backgrounds from different Muslim countries.
Okay. Herr Wipf, jetzt wurde ja...
Mr. Wipf, so we've heard that there isn't really a claim to absolute truth, but it's a question of one's own individual truth that you can't impose on others. So the question remains then, why is it so easy to abuse religion to the ends of violence? Or, as Hans Meyer said, monoethnic religions are susceptible to violence because they believe in a single God. Well, I would like to say I agree with what Mr. Pally had said, namely that the question could have been very different, that religion has a claim to a role as a healing force, as a uniting force, and our society would be very different if people showed their faith in a loving God and showed love towards one another. There has been a consistent role of religions in many conflicts to reconcile the parties. Now, there is a tendency to see only danger, but we in our countries and in many other countries, we can live together with many other religions, and that's the normal case. There are exceptions, and there is danger there. But in most societies, the norm is that religion is a force for reconciliation and peace. But religion also touches upon the fundamental question of where do I come from? Why am I here? Where am I heading? And because it touches upon these fundamental questions which drive people, sometimes it's possible that people are exploited. Their faith is exploited by political systems. Normally, it's cases of economical or political conflicts which find their outlet in a religious manner. And any claim to an absolute truth, any kind of fundamentalism, makes religion dangerous because it can then be abused, it can then be turned into an instrument, and it then has the potential for violence. And we need to be aware of that. Our Muslim brothers and sisters sometimes have to be reminded of the following principle, which is that we need to be able to criticize our religions. There's another principle, which is that state and religion need to be separated. The state is the protector of freedom and not truth. This is where the borders are, less with regard to Judaism, because we are so entwined one with another. I think that these are questions that we need to address, particularly in Switzerland. Okay, well, should we open up the discussion? Well, I just wanted to ask, if it is as you have described it, how can you explain the move for missionaries in Christianity and Islam? And just in the case of Christianity, there were many missionaries who expressed themselves with violence towards Judaism or justified through their belief the exclusion of Jews. Now, were these just mistaken individuals, or is there something inherent in Christian teaching which implies that? No, that's an abuse of religion. What you're talking about is a huge problem. It's something that the Christian church has as a burden of guilt vis-a-vis Judaism. Now, this is not something that exists in our churches today. It does exist in some, but this idea of a mission to convert Jews is completely wrong. A mission has its meaning in teaching, is something that I use from my life experience, and actually end up asking people, why are you helping me? Why? And asking questions like, why am I living like I'm living? And so this issue of mission and missionaries has been fundamentally misunderstood and abused.
Jump into the abuse question. Religion is a human institution. God may be God, but religion is a human institution. And like any other human institution, it can provoke generosity, great beauty, great soothing, great acts of love and peace, and it can be abused like political and economic and social institutions towards great cruelty and violence. I think there's a real irony on the part of some people who are hostile to religion and people who want to tame it or privatize it, to in a way deify it by making religion deified rather than a human institution, which, like all institutions, is subject to our conduct. And human beings are known for great beauty and great love and great peace and extraordinary measures to help each other and unspeakable violence to each other. Religion as an institution is no different. If we look at the 20th century, on the violence score, not a great century, the major catastrophic violence was caused not by systems that appeal to the divine, but by systems that appealed to various economic systems. We can think of Stalin, Mao, or to systems that appeal to racial ethnic systems. We can think of the Nazi Zeit and the Shoah and so on. We know that human beings are very good at using any pretext to violence when it's in their interest. We can rely on Reinhold Niebuhr, one of the great Christian theologians, to remind us how good we are in justifying our violence, but it is not particular to religious justifications. And if we want to talk about violence, let's broaden the topic and talk about human tendencies.
Hartelijk dank. Nu, es ist halt nun ein
Yes, well, we're coming to the question. You're absolutely right. Mr. Bully, did you want to speak?
I think, yeah, more or less similar to what she said. Religion is not the only preserve of violence. Violence is done in the name of many things, nationalism, racism, you name it. And then the history, she has mentioned a few, Rwanda, Srebrenica, and Holocaust. All these were done not in the name of religion. They were done for something else. And I agree that some people can use or abuse or misuse the name of religion, or even they can use religious terminology or texts. But the reason that they use religious texts for violence is because they have certain motives. That motive could be power, that could be domination, and that's across the world throughout the history. So it's not the religion itself that is responsible. It's the way human beings interpret religion and use or misuse it.
Okay. Also, ich finde.
Well, I think it's wonderful that we're listening to people saying that religion isn't something that causes violence. But I do have to sort of drive this question home. Mrs. Broccoli, you said there are different ways which you can interpret the Psalms or teaching. So my question is, how can you interpret these things? For example, in Matthew 23 in the Bible, Jesus said, how do you want to avoid hell to the Pharisees? Or in the Quran as well, it talks about the faithless, and I know that this is a very widely quoted example. When there seems to be teaching to kill unbelievers or punish unbelievers, it seems to be impossible to interpret differently. If it seems to be saying that deceiving people in their belief is worse than actually killing them. And I'd turn here and ask, maybe if we take it chronologically. But I would like to give the question to the Imam.
This is a very important question you just raised, and the most important side of this is when we get it wrong. And that's why when I talk about incapable scholars, and our sister talk about interpretation of scriptural text. The scriptural text that seems ambiguous, that seems to promote hate in the sight of incapable scholars. The scriptural text that seems to promote war and division. But it seems to promote that because of the interpretation of incapable scholars, who is interpreting in his own understanding, half-baked knowledge of understanding that text. However, religion is as old as man. It is the institutions that build the ethics, the code of conduct of how man can relate at his own personal level, within his reality and his own world, within himself, and then within him and his neighbor, and within and the society he lives in. And because of that systems, and as man goes in his own way, because there's a free will for man to behave positively or negatively, that freedom is given to man by God. And no religion can take that away, that free choice to be what he wants to be. And in this free choice, very often in the history, God keep man and continue working with man, helping man to discover, to move to the ideal of what he's supposed to be. And in that, man go to war and fought war on his own, but religious guide him on the ethics of the social construct of what life should be and how he should relate in life. And that's why, even at the time of when physical aggression encroached on him, how did he defend himself against external aggression? Secondly, when he decided, even in defending himself, the scripture giving code of conduct, what he need to do, what he must not do. So therefore, when people quote the scripture out of context, that at the time of war, either in self-defense or aggressive war against defending the identity of who you are or what you are, then people quote that out of context to say, yes, somebody walked into this, for example, this country had just passed a vote on the minaret. There is a genuine fear for Swiss people, genuine fear of what is happening around the world, but they don't want it to happen in their own country. They don't believe that thing should happen here, and we have to do something. But in doing something, they treat the symptoms instead of the real issue of saying, can we go into open dialogue with our brothers who are Muslims, who are Swiss citizens, to tell us what is the importance of the minaret? Is it, do you put a bomb there? Or is it the minaret that determines the violence or that encourage violence? Or it is the heart or something else? So they voted in that direction, and we know what happened and what is still going on in this country. But the important element there is, supposing there's external invasion of this country, religion teaches you how to protect your country, your identity. But when somebody quoted out of context and say religion has given me power to just go and crush the other person because his truth is not in line with my own truth, his culture is not in line with my own culture, then and then he's getting it wrong. And I feel that is the important thing. Many of our religious leaders who are half-baked or mischievous religious leaders or political activists in the name of national, other layers of identity who want to use religion, use it in order, because of the emotional or sensitivity of religion, in order to win a vote, to maintain themselves in parliament and say we need to go into war. Mm-hmm. And that the context of holy war, there's nothing like holy war. War is a negative thing, and it has no basis in Islam, and I feel the same thing in other traditions of Abrahamic traditions.
Habib.
Ich nehme jetzt noch nicht die Minarettabstimmung.
I won't turn to the question of the minaret, but maybe we can talk a little bit about it later. You said something very important about how we relate to Scripture. The Bible talks about the history of people's relationship with God, and most Christians interpret the Bible as well and ask what the most important passages are. This passage, which Mrs. Brocker can also talk about, does show Jesus using very strong language, but he's using it about the people in his immediate environment, not people outside. Remember a story that I remember very fondly in Davos about Jesus driving people out of the temple, and that clearly showing that Mammon could not be a false god. And I think that that's something to bear in mind when we're here in Davos. Now, it's very radical, and it's for us Christians, it's very important to remember that Mammon is not a god. We must remember that we are all creations of God. That's something that we all share. And no person can be a god to other people. So the passage that you mentioned, and obviously we'd need to get into a discussion about this, but it's touching upon the laws of the living God in words that we cannot really repeat. We have no literal interpretation of the Bible, but it is a call from Jesus to people saying that your brother is more important than the laws which you have to observe. Can I just say something very briefly on that? I think it's one of the very interesting aspects in the Judeo-Christian dialogue of the last few years, which has revolved around this passage and others over recent years. The debate between the Jews who followed Jesus and the majority of the Jews who didn't follow Jesus led to an internal conflict in Judaism. And that internal conflict is something which leads us to express ourselves clearly and without much diplomacy. And that, in the time of Jesus and Paul, was exactly the same thing. That hasn't changed. What's problematic is that from the moment that these texts came out of an internal Jewish conflict and were taken by the followers of Jesus as their own scriptures, but not from their own history, that constituted the fracture between Judaism and Christianity, because these words were taken up in the Christian tradition, in the Christian Bible, but they came from our history. So I would say, in passing, that I doubt that there's something like 3 Abrahamic religions, but if there are, then the Muslims have a traditional history which bypasses Isaac and went through Ismail. And Jews and Muslims have Abraham as a father. Christians are probably not provided for in that. They are not Abrahamites. Muslims and Jews are. So what I'm trying to say, that this is right. Christians and Muslims are religions in terms of a faith community, and we are a community of being. Jews and Muslims have a binomic existential manner, and I'm just speaking about Judaism here. If you were born as a Jew, then you are a member of, I don't want to use the word a people or a nation because it might lead us astray, but you are a Jew, a member of the Jewish people, part of a community of being. And those two together make up a Jewish identity. Now, to the extent to which a Jew believes in a God or not is the decision of the individual. The fundamental question of Jewish existence lies herein. And this is something that the Muslims had as well, when Islam and Arabic, belonging to the Arabic community, was also a binomic question. Later, there came a separation of those, and it was possible through missions of Islam to separate out the religion from the ethnic identity. So you have the Conference of Islamic States, for example, which have 59 members, and the Arab League, which has 27 members, because you no longer have that. Those two identities inextricably linked. And so these concepts of Judaism, Islam, Arab, and Christianity all need to be clearly defined and not really sort of thrown in together and seen as equivalent. So the question of these texts, which came from Jewish culture but were taken up in Christian tradition, is something which has to be dealt with separately from the question of whether we're Jewish or Christian or what have you. Now, I'm not a theologian. I'm not sure I fully understood what you were saying, but just a follow-up question to that. Perhaps what you've said changes nothing about the consensus that we've found, namely that these scriptures, wherever they come from, don't have to be interpreted as leading to violence, even if they might sound like they're violent. Well, I would ask for a bit of subtlety in interpretation, but perhaps I should give the floor to my colleague.
Well, I don't want to lose the world's 2.3 billion Christians so easily. My favorite theologian reminds us that Christianity is merely a sect of Judaism. Let me quote some other Bible passages on the subject of interpretation. Man shall beat his swords into plowshares, neither shall there be war anymore. Man shall love his neighbor as himself. Man shall love the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and the enemy. I think the question about pulling out Bible passages and saying, if this is written, how can it be that we are not at each other's throats on religious grounds killing each other? There are 6 million Buddhists in the world, 600 million Buddhists, 800 million Hindus, 1.6 billion Muslims, and 2.3 billion Christians, 13 or 14 million Jews. If everyone who believed in a religion took it to violence, we would have even more violence than we have today. The idea that biblical interpretation leads to violence is not borne out empirically, and it's not borne out historically. The first arguments for religious toleration, separation of church and state, and freedom of conscience in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries in Europe came from religious thinkers to protect religious belief, and thereby developed, I'm thinking of people like Sebastian Frank, Sebastian Castellio, Roger Williams, John Locke, and thereby developed ways of structuring society so that people who did not agree on religion could agree on government and agree on society. So I don't think the idea about interpretation works empirically, it doesn't work historically, and it doesn't work when you consider religious subjectivity. A seriously religious person wrestles very earnestly with not only religious doctrine, but with the entire question of theodicy and man's cruelty to other men. It is a highly subjective, as our Imam has pointed out, and rigorous course of dealing with the world. It is the opposite of a superfluous and shallow engagement with our planet. And it's precisely because of religious subjectivity that the arguments for freedom of conscience were born to protect that subjectivity. So I would like to suggest that one of the gifts religion has given us is the foundation for respecting the subjectivity of the other, and therefore for pluralism and liberal democracy.
Thank you.
I think in addition to what she just said, I often find phrases from the cover of the Holy Quran that reaffirm the humanity of the human family. Because when after becoming a nonviolent peace activist, and I have my teacher who was put me through, I have face-to-face dialogue engagement with those incapable scholars who justify violence using religious tests or the exclusive approach. To ask them, if you say exclusive, when the Quran says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, it talks of those who believe, sincere believers within the faith of the Quran. When it says, Ya ahlul kitab, he talks about those who are not Muslims, but they are Jews by background, or their sister, I will use the language now, the Christian by the other side of the ground. Or when it talk about Ya Ayyuhan Nas, or it refers to all mankind, either those who believe or you don't even believe at all. And so what was the context by which the Quran bring in the classification of each person holding his own inner conscience? And I feel one of the fear during our encounter is about the fear of losing identity, losing our identity. So you use every means necessary in protecting the identity, like the case in France. We have the France value. That the case in Britain some times ago during Tony Blair, he was talking about our culture as British. So I'm saying, what is your culture as British? You get the point. So what is your value as France? The culture. What is the fear about your value as Swiss? So when you go into this deeper analysis, you see that you have an identity you want to protect. And in protecting that identity, we use all means, and that is the question about the evangelical movement in the United States, how they still have influence in the political process. And that's why I feel here the engagement is looking at, is there a positivity within the secularists, those who are the extreme secularists and the extreme religionists, to have them on the table where we need to discuss this fear of those core values each one have on his own level, to say, as a secularist, I have a value, I'm a humanist, or I'm whatever, I have my sexual orientation, whatever I have this way, and as a religionist, you have this. Can we have a middle point where we can all meet together and talk of the common good of the human family? And I feel there's need for a platform for that.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to jump in.
Yeah.
Hello? Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in just for a second because you've pushed my research subject, American Evangelicals. There are some American evangelicals who became very visible both in the United States and in Europe in the last 35 years, and particularly under the presidency of George W. Bush, for not only their conservative positions, but for seeking to impose their interpretation of Christianity, which is one interpretation of many, on the country through government. We refer to them as the religious right, and they continue to exist at about 12 to 13% of the American population. However, since 2004, there has been a significant move by many evangelicals in the United States away from the religious right in self-identity, in political goals, and in political means and limits to achieve those goals. Sometimes they're referred to as new evangelicals, but they're now running between 20 and 25% of the American population. Their key characteristics are embrace and insistence on separation of church and state for the sake of protecting all religious believers. Their top priorities in social action are poverty relief, social and economic justice, and environmental protection.
Möchte gern das Stichwort Identität.
I'd like to pick up this keyword of identity. I think it's a very important term. I certainly don't want to insist on talking about the vote on minarets, but there is a connection. We have given an example, a small one, of being different. We are not identical. The religions are not identical. This is something we have to accept, but it is certainly not a reason to differ in debate, but rather to join in hands and make progress. One thing that I've learned in Christian theology is, first of all, how important the Jewish roots of Christianity are, and secondly, how important feminist theology and liberation theology is. But we have learned this thanks to debate, thanks to talking about it together. But this difference may never lead to trying to convince others of the truth through violence. Now, another thing, in the last 10 years, a definition of tolerance has emerged, which has nothing to do with tolerance. It's simply indifference. Doesn't really matter. We all believe something or other. I think that questioning identity, what is my own personal belief or faith? Where are my roots? And for many of us, our roots are in Christian religion. That one questions this or reads about all these subjects. The three religions represented here are based in books, in texts, and we therefore can read a lot about all these questions. We ourselves need to question our own religious and belief roots. This strengthens our own identity and removes or reduces the fear we have of meeting with others who have a different belief or religion. We have to know where we come from, what we believe in, and this also takes away from us the fear we have of the stranger, the other.
Nur, die möchte ich jetzt noch.
But the question is, the practicing of the strict separation between the state and religion, the secularism where religion is really in the private sphere. Is this not in contrast to this? The answer is that religion is certainly a private matter. The state and the community, society does not have the right to interfere. But of course, religion has social consequences. In our country, we have people who have very strong beliefs and a strong faith, either in Judaism, in Christianity, in Islam. And this is very important for the state because the state has to rely on people who know where they are going, where they're heading for, and do things that the state cannot do. The state cannot love. We have to do that, we the individuals. So this gives a framework to the state within which people can live and love. Even if we forbid a building, actually it really meant something quite different because we have become unsure about our own identity, our own beliefs. The state can lay down a framework, and in this framework we can discuss all sorts of things, but we cannot decide it. I think the time has come, and it is high time to include all the participants in this discussion, open up the discussion to you. So please put some questions, either address your question to someone on the panel or address it to anyone on the panel or the whole panel, and we'll try and answer your questions. Are there any really burning issues that you wish to raise? Yes, there's someone here at the back.
Mein Name ist Alec Ganne.
Alec Ganne. I work in India in development aid and cooperation, and I'm very interested in religions. I was wondering about ethics. What can religion do to reduce violence? We have touched upon this issue of the minarets. We voted on minarets on the 29th of November, but also on the exporting of war materials. A month before the vote, the churches suggested that every individual was free to vote as they wished regarding the exporting of arms and weapons. Religion has much to say about freedom and beliefs and the creation, and such a vote would have been the opportunity for the Protestant churches to set itself off from Ecumenical, the employers' associations. Could you please put the question, how is it ethically possible that such an institution does not tell the political party that has as one of its words in its name Christian, continues to support the exporting of war materials and arms and weapons, Mr. Vip? the Protestant churches will continue to give arguments that will help individuals to take decisions, but we still believe that individuals are free to take their own decisions. We have thought about it very carefully. We also wrote a lot and produced a lot of papers on this subject of whether Switzerland should continue exporting weapons. But we are honest enough to say that for as long as we have an army and import weapons from abroad, we are perhaps not quite credible. Basically, you are right, but on all other issues, we've also always spoken out very clearly, but we've never as a church told individuals you have to vote in this way or in another way. We cannot hear, unfortunately, what the speaker is saying or asking.
Gut, lassen wir das mal noch stehen. Weitere Fragen, bitte?
Well, we may come back to that later on, says the moderator. There's another question here at the back.
Good evening. My name is Wilmot Allen. I'm from the United States, and I am a management consultant to emerging economies. I also am a minister at a church in Los Angeles. And I wanted to pose the question related to common ground in terms of a commitment to common principles among the world's religions. And that question is this: why have we not seen more cooperative interaction around humanitarian assistance from the various faiths, given that in terms of the moral principles from a variety of faith traditions, there seems to be a consensus or a common concern for the common welfare and the benefit of all humanity, particularly when it comes to relief assistance, eradicating poverty. Of course, there has been work, very good work, individually in individual communities, but across the board in terms of collaborative interfaith action. Why have we not seen more of that?
Can I pick that up? Yeah. Yes?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your question. I would like to respond rather than bemoaning why it hasn't been better so far, with building on your question for positive examples, which we, to my mind, fortunately, are seeing a great deal of at the moment in the United States. And I want to take the evangelicals that I mentioned earlier as an example, precisely because the word evangelicals is associated with exclusivity and, as I mentioned earlier, the imposition of their interpretation of Christianity through government. Yet, the evangelicals that I have been studying and doing my field research on, again, 20-25% of the American population, are doing tremendous work, and quite a bit of it in bridge building to other Christian groups, to non-Christian groups, with Jewish and Muslim groups sharing facilities and sharing budgets and sharing projects in precisely the areas that you mentioned and I mentioned a moment ago: social and economic justice and environmental protection. And I might add, also working with non-religious organizations towards these two goals. So our record, you're quite right, historically on that has not been as brilliant as it could have been. But we have some models or examples of where it's working better, and maybe it's those that need a bigger microphone so that people around the world can see, when it works well, what it really looks like. Small anecdote from one evangelical minister in my study who was asked by a colleague of his, a Muslim professor at a local college, to come and participate in the world religions course. And the students were confused as to how a Muslim and a Christian were getting along so well. Young students, perhaps naive and full of some prejudices. And they answered the students by saying, the highest principle in our religions is love of our fellow man and respect. And that is a higher principle than other more particularist doctrines. And so my first duty as a Christian is to love and respect my Muslim brother. My first duty as a Muslim is to love and respect my Christian brother. And with that kind of framework, we, at a pragmatic level, seem certainly in the last 6 years to be seeing significant increases in just the kind of interfaith, social justice, and environmental protection programs that you mentioned.
Thank you.
When it comes to Great Britain, there are good practices in the local and national level. Even the government in 1992 formed a body called Inner Cities Religious Council. An interfaith network came in the middle of 80s. And locally, there are so many organizations, interfaith organizations, Muslim, Christian, Jews coming together and working for the simple thing like living ways in London or different issues that is not religious, but that helps bringing people together. You know, one of the cities called Leicester, imams and vicars and the rabbis play football together. So these are the good practices are in the local level. Sometimes what happens, these good practices are not seen by sections of the media, especially the far-right media in England. And whenever any small issue comes by any community, they are magnified. The most important thing for us to increase this common ground is to see each other as human beings or citizens and find the commonality. In human beings, there will be differences and diversities, but I think if we count the differences with the things that we agree, we'll find in most of the areas we agree, probably one or two areas or some areas we disagree. But if we like the glass half full or half empty, if we just multiply our difficulties and diversities, then that will not take us anywhere.
Thank you.
I think on that, just in addition to that, Nigeria, as you must have on the media here, is one of always the flashpoint, negative, negative, negative. Either in the name of Sharia or in the name of ethnic or in the name of oil, there's always massive conflict around the line. And I feel within those conflicts, there are still good practices. For example, of the interfaith engagement, which we are doing in Nigeria, there's a lot of interfaith approach, a special approach on the national level where religious leaders work together for the common good of all. However, my own challenge is most of our political leaders, they are either members of the church, the synagogues, or the mosques, or including the monks in the monasteries. However, they use so much of our taxpayers' money in the area of arms, enhancing, sustaining violence in different modus, structural violence. They help in promoting discourse among our community. And up to today, as religious leaders and as people of faith, these are people who believe, even though very often they say, we believe, but we don't belong. The political leaders have that idiom. We believe, but we don't belong. But those who believe, we need to get to them as long as you believe that you have a responsibility on the ethics of loving thy neighbor as yourselves. To let's move a step forward to say, all the military or arms industry, can we turn them to chocolate factory? And to turn them to chocolate factory, I think Swiss has a role model for the world to start that. Because Swiss as a nation, we have 140 million people. And perhaps America has so much, 300 and something million people to do it, to give them work to do, a job to do. But 6,000 to 10,000 people, Swiss can give them alternative jobs. And therefore, turn the military arms factory into what? Into a chocolate industry. Why do I say this? Why do I say this? Is that...
What would happen to the Swiss economy?
Yeah, because Swiss has a strong economy, and they have a lot of excess money now in reserve. They are not indebted to other nations, or the other nations are indebted, in my own analysis of what I've read. And what important thing is Swiss has set a role model. During the Second World War, when the whole world the area was burning, the German Swiss, the French Swiss, the Italian, they're able to find a niche for themselves. And this was for over 700 years. And they're able to stay together to show a role model for the world, that with different diversity of our faith and traditions, we can still live together and create a safe haven. They refused to be part of UN until about a decade ago. But the whole world say, we want to be with you. Please give us a place in Geneva. And they put everything in Swiss. So I feel more the Swiss need to set the ball rolling as a role model so that the whole world should follow, as they are a safe haven for the world today.
Well, I think we'd have to have a second panel about that question. Peace is perhaps not a natural state of affairs. It's a hard job. Certainly the peace in one's own heart, and this is something that has to do with religion, is hard work. Peace with your neighbors. If we're talking about Switzerland, it's certainly not a model. But, for example, the idea of our army, which is to protect an area of freedom against aggression, if necessary. There was then a necessity to say this far and no further. And to switch from that to chocolate factories, and I must say personally, I don't like chocolate that much, is perhaps a bit sudden. We need to take into account what is actually meant by these questions. Obviously, the Bible says you cannot make peace with weapons. That's very important. The developmental assistance, which Christian organizations as well as others do, the questions of neighborly love, all of these are very important. It's very important to work in areas of conflict. It's important that not only business decides about the economy, but those organizations which are concerned with the human aspect. All of that's very important, but we cannot reach the easy conclusion that simply that my peace, the peace I feel, will simply spread naturally. It's more complicated than that. Now, I didn't think I'd ever try and make an explanation for the Swiss army, but I suppose that's what I'm doing, and my neighbor says that that's very good. I'm very happy with that because she's coming from a very different background. Mrs. Brocker, well, I'm very grateful that once again you have stated that the longing for peace is a longing that humans have had since the dawn of time. We have always longed for peace. And although religions preach love and love towards your neighbor and everything else that you've said, it has two aspects, like people themselves. And I don't know if longing for freedom is what we have to talk about and say at the same time that we have respect for one another. I would say myself that for a long time, since 79, I've been involved in Christian Judaism dialogue. And the question for me is, what mechanisms can we develop together for cases of conflict, so that when push comes to shove, we can use these mechanisms in order to prevent not just conflict, but just an absence of peace. We need mechanisms to ensure that peace doesn't fall apart. And a well-known theologian, whose name I can't remember for the moment, said that the border, is the real area of knowledge. It's the place where knowledge arises. It's the place where my identity has its boundaries, and the identity of the other has its boundaries. Where those boundaries meet, we have the capacity to learn about ourselves and to achieve the freedom which you're talking about. We have the freedom to recognize the identity of others. And if these mechanisms work for bridge building, if these two parties wish to build bridges, then the mechanisms can kick in. If they don't want to build bridges, then we can have mechanisms as well to ensure that it doesn't lead to conflict. Mrs. Brocker. I think the question of mechanisms is very important. And how does one avoid conflict escalating when you come to the boundaries that you're talking about? I'd like to come back to that. But we have a question from the floor. This young man here. The microphone's coming to you.
I understand that we should love each other, and a lot of things are done to make this happen, but how do you think that the actual politic and economic system can promote more than today all the example you gave us? Because basically we hear more about the new Apple thing than what are made between people to make people love each other. So how come we don't hear more about what every people is doing to make peace more than people doing to gain money?
That's very easy said than done. Loving each other is obviously inherent in human beings. And I think in the local level or at the community level, neighborhood level, this is more or less going okay in most societies, most cultures, in most of the time. But the problem comes with the political leadership or those who want to be rich or power or dominate the world. That is really difficult. How could Bush and Bin Laden love each other? I don't know. so that the problem with the leaders who want something more that is required for their country or for their community or for their society. So it goes back again to the root of using and abusing religion or race or nationalism, color. This will remain probably forever. But what we can do as individuals or as common people, we can create a momentum, and that momentum can turn into snowball into these social dimensions, so that our political leaders or those who want to create havoc in the world, they are forced to stay in the path. I think that's not also easy, but that's what we can do as common citizens, probably.
Ms. Pally.
2 quick points. Two quick points. I will point out that historically religious thinkers have given some of the greatest thoughts to man's aggression and what is needed to counteract it. Aggression born of fear, of insecurity, of losing identity, and so on. And so perhaps if we were, first of all, better educated in serious religious writings and took it seriously, we might have a basis for some of those mechanisms that you were mentioning. And as a pragmatic example, there is an interfaith and bipartisan council in the United States at the national level that is working on poverty relief. And one of the reasons that it's working so well is that they begin every meeting by recalling that this is a religious interfaith council as well as Democrat and Republican. So they begin every meeting by recalling that they are believers first and Democrats or Republicans second, which, as was quoted to me, allows us to focus on solving the problems and not our political divisions.
Thank you.
Eine kurze Ergänzung machen. Ich möchte Ihre
Well, I'd like to pick up that point on a different level. The commandment, the invitation to love others is difficult in our world, the world as it is today during the World Economic Forum, but it begins by doing what you've done, by standing up and asking the question. In the finance question yesterday, nobody asked. And I would like you to translate this question into the terms of society, economy, finance, politics, and live that question, not forget the question, to fully appreciate the complexity of the situation and ask what is essential in these situations. And that's where love begins, through you and through me.
Okay.
Okay.
It's okay?
Yeah, he did. He just came into my world. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we go back to the audience.
Eine Frage noch, bitte?
Another question? Young man at the back at the right, and then the lady.
Hello. Hello. I would have liked to ask you, you seem all to defend a very liberal interpretation and very free interpretation of the Bible, or of the Quran, or whichever source, whichever textual source you follow. I would say that this is not corresponding, that this does not represent the majority of the religions you actually represent. And according to the vision which you have presented here today, which is a very liberal and very intellectual and very critical one, what is the purpose of keeping such textual sources if they can be discarded according to reason and other criteria which are not, well, yeah, according to other criteria? And then I wanted to ask Mr. Vip, you talked about mission, and that mission had fundamentally been an error in the history, but it seems to me a bit simple to simply to discard like that 300 or 400 years of Christian history and Christian philosophy and Christian ultimate goal, I suppose. And you said that mission was something you, the other asking why you are helping them, why, and it's something you are really passionate about. I've been to 2 meetings of evangelical young Christians in Le Landron, even though I myself am not like that, and I talked about mission and proselytism and how it was totally unnecessary. But the answer I got was, well, it's like, imagine if you really like basketball, if you're really, really passionate about it, if you love basketball, you're going to tell others around you how cool basketball is and how they should start playing it. But I think there's a fundamental difference in that in mission, you tell the other person that if they do not adhere to your playing, if they do not adhere to your helping, to your loving, then they will be doomed to an eternity of damnation, or because that is still...
Thank you. I think this have been a lot of different questions. I think we have tried to give some answers. Yeah, Ms. Pally.
I think we need to distinguish, first of all, between liberal and non-exclusionary. I don't think that what we've been discussing today is a liberal interpretation of religion, certainly not in the research that I've been doing for many years, but it is a non-exclusionary and a pluralistic and tolerant vision of interpretation. I would add that the evangelicals that I've been researching would insist on the interpretation that you've been hearing from the stage, not just tolerate it, insist on it. This is their interpretation, and I'm going to plunge into the missionary question, that being the respectful and pluralistic and tolerant. I have my beliefs, and I understand that you have yours. Plunging into the missionary question, let me give let me give an example from, again, American evangelicals, that it's neither, I think basketball is cool, so I want to tell you about it, or you have to obey my rules or you can't play on this basketball court. It's neither of those. But what I have observed is a highly nuanced and sophisticated position on this, born of years of working through Christian tradition and Christian ethics, which sounds something like this. I go to Zimbabwe and to work on HIV and AIDS because I, the hypothetical I, am a Christian. I don't impose my beliefs on anyone. If someone asks me why I am doing this, I will tell them. If they're interested further, we'll talk. If not, that's the end of it. And to quote one of a pastor who is head of overseas missions from an evangelical church, a very small town in the United States, this is the fellow who is head of overseas poverty relief and social justice efforts in Africa and in Latin America. And he said, I've dug 20, 30-foot deep wells with guys who don't believe anything that I believe. And if they ask me why I'm out there sweating and doing it with them, I'll tell them. And if not, hey, we've dug a well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Going?
Okay. I think, sorry, okay. Liberal or rigid is a matter of relative things. It's a human construct, and religious text could have many interpretations, and obviously Quran had, over the last 1400 years, many different interpretations, depending on the context, depending on the age. But the main message remains the same. As the society moves and makes its way, interpretation could change. But what happened post-Renaissance Europe was more or less, for whatever historical reason, didn't like Christianity or religion, to the extent that when communism came, the father of communism, or the one who Karl Marx called religion as the opium. So the debate that we are having now, or discussion that we are having now in the current context is because religion has resurfaced. And this resurfacing, I mentioned this in Britain, is because of some of the so-called Eastern religions like Hinduism, Sikhism, and all these religions, which more or less empowered Christianity, if I can use this word, in Britain. So that's one thing. On the issue of proselytization, Christianity and Islam is a proselytizing. They are proselytizing religion, but there's a difference between sections of the Muslim community and also sections of the Christian missionaries who took advantage of people's poverty and difficulties and tried to convert openly and publicly. That's the thing that's not acceptable. But it's more or less winning over hearts, and Islam and Christianity has over millennia has been working on that. That's why people from across the world are either Muslims and Christians.
Thank you. So we have to see a little bit on time, and short answers, please, Mr. Ashafa.
I think I just want to make a comment about proselytization. And I feel strongly that the idea of proselytization, both Islam and Christianity, and partially Judaism today, are proselytizing faith. Especially Islam, because there are scriptural texts, the Mark 16 and the Quran, that justify the idea of proselytization. And if you tell me I don't proselytize, I'm not being real, true to myself. And if I tell you, no, I don't want you to become a Muslim, you just be there. My dream is all of you here should become Muslims and leave your beards to grow. That is my dream. But in the context of what? Not in the context of imposing myself on you or intimidating any of you. So the same thing applies. I know if you ask other Christian missionaries, they would love to see me becoming a Christian. So there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel the challenge is how do we market our product? And we need to see the two religions as product that we need to market, e.g., Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. Each one is marketing its product to the best of its ability without strengths. But they do market their product, and people buy what they want to buy. They are all soft drinks. You either want to buy Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola, you go and buy it. None of them is abusing or intimidating its customers. So religion should be able to stay, and people should be able to express themselves and even market their product. When you see it as a marketable product, then you remove your stress of saying, I don't want that guy. You didn't have to talk to me. He didn't force you to be part of him. He has his own ideas of marketing his own product. And when we see it that way, we help release the tensions with which we are creating within our given society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Herr Wipf, auch eine.
Mr. Wipf, a very short answer. Well, we can sit side by side, and I can say that my own firmest conviction, even though I did not have this as, didn't believe this as a young man, it has grown with age. We can sit side by side and say we have this dream. But what is more important is to become loving individuals, not just amongst people, but also, and despite the evil structures of this world, I think that is our reason to be and to be here. And there are two very important questions that have to be put. You put this question about liberal interpretation. It's very decisive. How does one read the Quran or the Bible, inclusive or exclusively? For me, Jesus has always been someone who wanted to bring people together, who crossed boundaries, who fought for the humanity of mankind. He was not exclusive. And if that is the interpretation, I don't mind being liberal. But you have put some very important questions. In all religions, there is exclusive interpretation of the scriptures that exclude others. Madame Brocke, can you convince the world very briefly in short words? Each of you have a dream, which I don't have at all. And that's why I said the picture on the brochure of the open forum is the right one. You have a dream, both of you a different one, but we don't have that dream at all. So this dream or the yearning of becoming a Muslim or a Christian really makes all the difference, a visible difference. I'm not talking about the militant aspect of mission work. In Germany, it's fairly militant, but I'm rather talking about the human psychological dimension. If everyone has this dream of people becoming either Christian or Muslim, you are automatically creating a difference in size, as if I was still at a less developed stage and have not reached your stage of development. I know I've understood you correctly, but when you have this expectation, then I find that the respect for me as a Jew is being questioned. And we have to make sure that this visible difference is not created, does not emerge. I hope that by quoting this boundary as the real place of recognizing and self-recognition has helped us to move away from this difference to some extent. Now, when push comes to shove, to avoid escalation, what can religion contribute? Could you perhaps formulate this just with one sentence or one idea?
You relax and reflect. That's the essence of religious teachings. You reflect and relax and see being your own human being and treat others as one of you.
Thank you. Ms. Pally.
Please study your own religious tradition at as high a level as you would study anything else, chemistry, literature, history, or philosophy, and plumb it for its ideals and structures of peace.
Thank you. Frau Brocke.
Eine ganz nüchterne.
A very factual, pragmatic analysis of the factors of power, and then see how you can avoid these factors of power. Mr. Vip? Reality is a movement and not a claim to power or dominion.
I think the bottom line is there is a circle of violence. There is a circle of vengeance going on in the world. People are full of pains in their heart, and they're looking for a way out to release these pains. And I feel because of that, people take to violence in the name of preemptive or direct strike at the perceived enemy. And the only solution, the only way forward, is to go back to our test and learn the power of forgiveness. Perhaps we declare a day of forgiveness in the world, starting from Davos here, where each person will look into himself. Some people have hurt themselves. They find it difficult to forgive themselves. Some people have been hurt by their immediate family members, or their community, or their political leaders, or their neighbors, and they find it difficult. If you find a day of forgiveness, even in our heart, to forgive those who have hurt us, we will indeed find a solution to religion or other institution being used as instrument for violence in our world.
Thank you very much. Ich wollte heute ja.
This evening I really wanted to explore the seed of violence in religions, but this panel has rather preferred to talk about love and what brings us together rather than what separates us, which may be because the panelists have been very tolerant representatives of their religion, but it also very much indicates the strength of love that these religions have to bring peace to this world. So thank you to all of you.